Welcome to the Broad Street Review podcast. I'm Darnelle Radford. Today on the podcast, Daniel Neer drops by to talk about the 2025 Philly Fringe Festival offering, Dachau for Queers, on stage at Theater Exile through September 28th. Here is my interview with Daniel Neer for Dachau for Queers. And welcome back, listeners. This is the Broad Street Review podcast, and I'm Darnelle Radford, your host. Thank you for joining us today. We are continuing our 2025 Philadelphia Fringe Festival coverage, and today I am in the virtual studio with Daniel Neer, whose new play, Dachau for Queers, will be on stage at my artistic home, Theater Exile. And so I'm here to chat with Daniel about this show. Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Darnelle. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So I just look at what kind of like pulls me by the title, and that's enough to say, let me inquire further to figure out what's going on here and see if I want to add this to my sort of eclectic mix of conversations. And before I knew you would be in our space, like this was a show that I was interested in to talk about. So I'm glad that all that lined up. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of this piece, let's tell us about Daniel Neer.
Oh, well, I'm a Philadelphia writer, a music educator, and performer. I moved here 4 years ago. Actually, I lived here a long time ago, like more than 20 years ago. And I always sort of knew that I would come back here because I love Philadelphia. I was in New York for 21 years. And then just as I prophesied, I moved back. And so I'm here now, and I'm sort of a hybrid. I do a little bit of everything, and writing is something that I started doing in 2005. And it's pretty much shared equally with my performing and teaching career.
Cool. Now, is it just plays you write, or you write in general, long form, short form, blogs?
Actually, the most I've written is opera libretti. I've been a librettist and a collaborator on 5 operatic ventures. This is my second play. Lots of starts, but no finishes. This is my second finish to a play.
Great. Just making a note here. That's great. And so tell us about this piece and Dachau for Queers and what inspired bringing it to Fringe at this time.
Oh, wow. Well, it's kind of a 2-part explanation. So Dachau for Queers, the title, refers to a nickname that was given to a psychiatric hospital in California, which is a real place. It still exists. In the 1960s, up until about 1973, it was a place where gay men were incarcerated for minor offenses. You could be arrested for holding hands, for kissing in public, that kind of thing. And instead of jail time, they were sent to a Atascadero hospital, which became nicknamed Dachau for Queers because the hospital endorsed a series of aversion therapies, both psychotropic drugs and also electroshock therapy, and most upsettingly, lobotomies. And so lots of gay men in San Francisco and Los Angeles were incarcerated and held there. Most of them were supposed to be for 2 or 3 months, but some of them ended up staying years, 9 to 11 years, some of them. And so that's the backdrop for the play. And I know it sounds extremely dark, but the good side, the yin and the yang to this is that it's actually a backdrop for a coming-of-age story for a teenage boy who runs away from home from Omaha, Nebraska to run away to San Francisco. He gets arrested and caught up in this maze, and he has to sort of use his wits and use his just sort of this developing sense of self-identity that he has to survive this awful place. So in many ways, it's sort of an allegory to the experience of gay youth coming out and surviving in America.
Yes. Okay. So it's not relevant at all to today.
The more things change, the more things stay the same, right? That's the
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of commonality, and I think audiences, when they go and see it, there are a lot of references to the 1960s. So I'm going to age myself terribly when I say that. But people will see a lot of relevance to stories from today. And it's not so much where you stand on a political spectrum. It's treating people with empathy and respect, right, where they are. And that, I think, is where we're missing a lot of the conversation now, is there's just not a lot of empathy and a striving for understanding for people that aren't like us. And that's really what the play speaks to.
Yeah. Yeah, very relevant topic, particularly, the conversations revolving in the last couple of weeks have been about, some of the things that people have said and the consequences from, vocalizing them in front of a microphone.
Yes. I mean, this is a time period for this young man where he had to come face to face with addressing the truth about his life or ignoring it. And he somehow knows deep inside of him, there's a kernel of him that understands that the way to happiness, no matter what the odds, and they are insurmountable odds, some of the things, but he knows instinctively that the path to happiness is in self-acceptance and self-love and self-identity. And that is a struggle, but he gets there. And for a 17-year-old boy, what he does in this sort of psychotropic haze that he's in with all of these drug treatments is he, in a fight or flight mode, he calls on the things that he knows of. He's a lover of comic books. So there's some comic book heroes that show up. Oscar Wilde makes an appearance and gives him a little pep talk. So these people that are sort of in the recesses of his mind appear to sort of counsel him in this drug-induced state of hallucination that he's in. So the play is nonlinear. It jumps all around. There are flashbacks, there are flash forwards. There are memories that are sort of two combined memories into one and a little messed up, but they help tell the entire story of his journey.
So when did you get started putting this piece together?
Well, 2 years ago, I heard a fantastic podcast by Lee Romney, who's a journalist in California. And she has a podcast I think it's called November in My Bones, but it's a podcast about the synergy of the California prison system with their mental health initiatives and the history of that, the complicated history of that. And so she did an episode on this period in the 60s at Atascadero where homosexuality was listed in the American Psychiatric Association's handbook. It was listed as a sexual deviation, and along with all sorts of awful crimes. And so you could be arrested for this. California was not always the blue state that we know and love today. It was much more conservative back then. And so this podcast talked about these people, these young men who were trapped in this place. And it's a shocking part of American history that as a queer man, as gay man, I had never heard of this. And so I was intrigued by it and my mind started immediately patching together a story to get the word out, to make sure people know that this happened. And this is the result of what can happen when laws and rules kind of topple over one another and common sense takes a back seat, way back. Because it was completely against common sense for minors, in some case, to be locked up with sexual felons in a psychiatric hospital. It's just unbelievable that it happened, but it did happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. Sometimes the fear, most of the time, the fear is short-sighted. It's like they're trying to solve one problem, but they create many other problems.
Yes, exactly.
Instead of like trying to understand what they think is a problem and perhaps changing their mindset on that, which is very interesting because the people who tend to be on the side of making things like this happen are not really interested in making their point any clearer, so that everybody can understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very pat way of dealing with an issue that turns into otherism. We sideline and we push people aside so that they're out of our out of our beautiful sort of frame of mind of the world, right? When we don't understand it, we otherize them and push them to the side. And it's still going on today. I think I read a couple weeks ago that that aversion therapy for gay teens is still legal in, I think it's 27 states, but it is like just barely the majority, but it is the majority of the country where it is still legal to endorse, to have these organizations running. And no one really stops to think about the long-term effects this has on these young individuals whose brains aren't really fully developed, right? I mean, they're kids in lots of ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then down the road, you're like, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened when, something even greater happens and it, affects a lot of people. It's like it's so interesting. We spend a lot of time thinking about how to bring up children. And we are well aware that the things that we do at that young age are going to imprint on them and they're going to be forever changed. But we still do the kind of things that we know are going to hurt them later because there's no real understanding when it's happening, at that age in childhood. And there's no attempt to try to explain it or justify it later either. And
Right.
so it takes the person to do a lot of work to say something like, "Oh, my dad worked all the time so that we could have a good life, and so I'm going to give him a pass for that." Or my mom didn't know any better, or something like.
Right.
We just sort of justify it, but we never really understand, like, you might even find out that because we try to live with everything, that we're ultimately saying, I don't know, I think I'm better for having that journey. And now you're going to pass this, you're going to carry this message forward, and
Right.
you're going to affect someone else in the same way. Like, I was made stronger because of it. And I was like, yes, but are you really happy?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's all manner of ways in which the mind you try to heal yourself with your past as you grow older, right? And, I remember seeing a hilarious, I think it was a 60 Minutes feature in the early 70s about the homosexual in America. And they were saying how, they were reporting with a totally straight face how the homosexual is often very sad and melancholy and troubled. And I was watching it and thinking, well, no wonder they were.
Yeah.
No wonder they were like, I mean, they were human beings. And when you live in a society that otherizes or casts you aside, and we try to really show with Jonah Goodson, who is the name of my hero in my play, we really try to show the fabric of his family and how they are intertwined in his life. He has a mother and father who are struggling to understand, and in their struggle, they obviously they make bad decisions, and they try to do the right thing, but they're not really hitting the mark because they don't understand. And he has a sister in college who sort of knows is much more on the wavelength of her brother and what he's going through. And so this family dynamic we pull into it too. And those three characters, they actually play many characters. I think there's 4 characters in the play that 4 actors that play a combination of 22 roles. But the mother, the father, and the sister are embodied in all sorts of other roles in Jonah's mind. They come in and out as a doctor and a nurse and all these characters in his life at that time. And so we do, I do try very hard to show the complications of the relationships and the reconciliation with them too. There's some flash forwards where he approaches his father, and that's a very interesting conversation. I try very hard to come full circle with the whole thing. Gay teenage suicide is an enormous thing. That is a problem. And we talk about it a lot nowadays, and we have all these statistics, but we don't really know. We can surmise what the statistics were for this in something like the 50s and 60s, but there was not quite the pathway then that there is even today. And so just the very nature of him thinking to himself, I got to get out of here and run away from home, that is in itself a survival instinct, right?
Yeah.
And so I was interested when I heard this podcast of honoring those people honoring that set of people that just didn't have much choice and bravely went out and tried to start a new life. And many of them succeeded. Many of them, of course, just had a hard time along the way. But it's all about survival. And I'm trying to say that in not too subtle a way. I really do believe it's survival. I think it is for every one of us. Every person that has this journey, right?
Yeah, that part's very interesting because I've had many conversations about we try to understand why the members of the queer community who came before us made the choices that they did, and sometimes there's an argument that you have to perhaps stay where you are and fight this. Like you can be a part of the change, but sometimes you're already weak. There's not enough here to give you strength. So you do have to go somewhere where there are more people like you and learn so that you can build that confidence. I also think it's very smart of you to take the characters, the 4 actors, and have them portray these roles who all embody like his parents, because any message that we get, when we decide to distance ourselves from this family dynamic is going to be through the lens of your parents, of what they said over time. And it's going to be hard for you to really shake all of that, even though you got away from it so that you could.
Yes. Yeah. And also, I really, the other reason I wrote this and I was very interested in it is I've been really, upset isn't really the right word, but discouraged in recent years about how the gay community in America has splintered apart, how the LGBTQ plus community has splintered. And you see all sorts of different factions happening. And that's not new. I mean, that was happening in the 70s with the Medicine Society and Daughters of Bilitis. I mean, there was a lot of split. And there was a lot about the AIDS crisis that galvanized that back together, but it's fracturing again. And I think it's important for the community too, to look at each other and realize that we have more in common than we do different. And we're stronger together by supporting one another. I'm a 58-year-old gay man, and I have a lot of empathy and for a trans youth, even though there's a lot about that I don't understand, and I'm learning every day, and I'm willing to learn. Mm-hmm. But we have to sort of meet each other where we are too, and so that's another thing that the play tries to address.
Yes, I do think people feel like, we identify as one big community, but I've heard this in many conversations as soon as we add something else to the acronym, and now it's just Q plus or it's IIAA PP, so on. Then people start to feel like, well, what's buried in here is that I'm a gay man.
Yes.
Because it's not important anymore. And now our focus is, like, for example, our focus is on trans rights because the trans community needs as much support as it can get. But there are people out there who feel like there's a part of what's going on today that has sort of normalized how they live. And so they don't feel othered as much, even though they're in the community that is still widely othered.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I always look back to what I can only recall. I can call on my personal experiences, right? Mm-hmm. And when I was in high school, which was the early 1980s, AIDS was a San Francisco, New York City thing. And by the time I started college in 1985, it was everywhere. So my college experience of coming out as a gay man was the full-blown AIDS epidemic and watching an older generation of men disappear. I mean, that was my coming-of-age experience. And watching, Ronald Reagan refuse to even say the word publicly, and the nation kind of went about as if, well, it doesn't involve me. It doesn't, and there was a lot of otherism that was happening then with gay men that was very scary. And the only thing that I can really recall that got us through it was community. We all really found each other. We we hung tight to one another. I was lucky to be in a theater and music atmosphere in a college in the Midwest. So,
Hmm.
I think you reach out and you cling on to people and you find your allies, and you just learn to deal with the hate, because there's an awful lot of hate.
Yeah.
And you just ride the wave through. So I think back to that period often, because, there were shocking things that were happening at that time. I still remember being in my dorm and watching on TV a representative in Congress standing at the mic on Capitol Hill and suggesting that all gay men be sent to an island like Guam until AIDS was understood better. I mean, it's ridiculous now, and it was ridiculous then, but it was, he said it in total seriousness into a microphone on Capitol Hill. So you sort of have to have your eyes wide open, I think, to the spectrum of reactions and the spectrum of feeling. This is an American family in my play that they were living this sort of post-Eisenhower American dream. And they didn't ask for this. This thing happened, and it fractured this family. And I don't think that that's an unusual story. I think that's unfortunately more the norm than it is the exception.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know there's a ton to unpack in here. And at the same time, I don't want to unpack too much of it because you want people to come and see the show.
My biggest fear, I'll be honest with you, is that people are going to think that it's depressing and down, and it is not at all. It's a very sort of uplifting. There's a lot to cheer for here, and we do cheer for a noble hero, and there are parts of it that are very funny. I have a fantastic core of actors that are just absolutely killing it. So it really does run an emotional gamut. It's interesting with the title, because I have gotten some reactions at the title of, that's a horrible title for a play, but I think, sometimes you have to get people to take a double take and take a double look. And I think Don Jackson, he was the journalist who came up with that term back in 1969 or 1970. I think he really knew what he was doing, because I think he was invoking purposefully something that would make people look twice and say, oh, these people are being held against their will. They're being marginalized. They're being experimented on. Some of them are dying as a result of these experiments. And so it was provocative, and it was meant to be,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if it was downplayed and subdued, like, you wouldn't pay attention.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is true. Especially now, everybody has to be shocked. You can't just say, we're just going to have a lovely evening. Oh, that sounds boring. I'm going to stay at home.
Right. Well, I remember conversations with Larry Kramer, right, with ACT UP Fight AIDS, and people said, boy, you're awfully angry. And he said, of course I'm angry. Yep. Someone has to be angry, right?
He wakes up on angry.
Yes.
Justifiably so, yes.
Exactly.
Yes, I went to I went to an event. I lived in Jersey City briefly, like 2013, 14. I remember going to an event where like some of the original founders of ACT UP were there, and I think Larry Kramer was there. And it was just, that same energy, that same fire was still very relevant then. It was just mind blowing. I can only imagine what it was like to be in New York at that time. Yeah. Or to be in a major city, like even like San Francisco, when everything was developing and going on. Like, I think there's a lot of people. Do you think the splintering in the community comes from sort of a lack of education? Like, maybe we don't remember what happened before and how much better things are today than they were, even though we still have new opportunity. I think
that's a lot of it. I think education is a lot of it, but I think a lot of the blame actually goes, I'm going to put myself and my generation into the blame, because there's a lot of people that, once the AIDS crisis was, for lack of a better term, under control. I mean, of course, it is far, far, far from being over. But there was a certain amount of comfort that a generation of people took into just living their lives and overcome that period. And I think that they weren't wide-eyed to realize that there were other issues coming up behind them. And instead of with trans youth, and instead of reaching back and helping, they sort of isolated. And I totally understand the instinct to do that. You just want to be able to live in your truth with your friends. Mm-hmm. Community. And I understand the human instinct to do that, to make a camp out of yourselves. But, speaking as somebody who didn't really have we did have a generation, but they were dwindling, who reached behind and helped us and supported us. I think that a mark was missed, and not everybody, I'm speaking broadly, but I think there could have been more of a coalition to sort of understand what was happening with a younger generation, and at least reach back and say, what can we do? How can we help you? Instead of, we're going to have our own pride parade, we're going to have our own pride functions, galvanizing and combining everybody and finding a way that everyone can have a voice.
Yeah. And it's like, how if someone overcomes addiction, sometimes they end up being a counselor or someone who wants to help other people get to where they are. And I guess I would totally understand someone who grows up and figures out their own identity and does not want to be on a soapbox about it. They just want to live. But they have to fight on behalf of everyone else who had a struggle and had to figure out to get to where they are now.
Yes.
And it's a tough burden to carry for the rest of your life. And that's because, society still thinks otherwise.
Yeah, it's a fight that no one asked for, but you have to you can't hide. You can't be an ostrich with your head in the sand. Everyone is involved. And there comes a time, and I hope audiences, I really see the theater as a place for empathy, for you to see something on stage that is not a part of your life that you can empathize with. And I just hope that people walk away with a more general sense of what it is to walk in someone else's shoes. For Jonah, for the play that I wrote, that character was sort of an amalgamation of lots of different oral histories and interviews that I read of survivors. But many people were silent about it. They changed their identity when they got out in 1972, 1973. They changed their identity and started new lives, and they didn't want to talk about it. But many of those people who did talk about it, they went into social work and education and addiction counseling and fields like that and stayed in the area to try to right the wrong that had been done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 2 years ago, you started working on this, and did you have an opportunity? Have you presented this to an audience before the Fringe?
Yeah, so we the first reading was in July of 2024, and that was just on Zoom with a bunch of friends. And then this past May, I had a reading where I invited 20, 25 close friends that are writers and performers and people that I've worked with to come and watch a reading of the play and to get some feedback. And that was extremely powerful and really helped me understand the play was in much better shape than I had thought it was. And it was really crystallized then what new scenes needed to be added to help boost some storylines. So I added 4 scenes after that reading. And then we just realized it was ready to go, and we decided to do it for Fringe. So it's been kind of a fast process from May until now. I didn't really think when we had that reading in May that we would be doing a Fringe production, but I don't know. I think there's great merit in when it's ready, put it up. Don't put it off any longer. Just throw it up and see what happens. So that's what we're doing.
And there's something gritty about Fringe too. You know, there isn't an expectation that there's already a publication of this piece. You know,
Yes.
you know what I mean. And so there is time, and you do need an audience. That's a healthy part of the development process. And I think people have been conditioned to feel like if you don't believe that this piece is fully locked, that they shouldn't, that there isn't a justification to pay to experience where it is right now. And I think a lot of artists, particularly in the Fringe right now, are sort of turning that on its head and saying like, this is part of development. Like you're seeing what we see here. Like there's a piece in The Fringe that has a couple of dates, but in between those dates, they are continuing to work on the piece.
Right, exactly.
And so if you see the first one, you go to the second one and it might be totally different, but you're seeing growth, like clear progress being made.
You know, I mean, I think that clarity I really have because of my collaborations in opera. Because when you work with a composer on an opera, I mean, the process is very long. You know, you do workshops of it, you do piano workshops, you work with different singers. You know, it's not unusual to spend 5, 7, 8 years, sometimes more, on developing an opera because it changes so much. And there's, by the very nature of the word opera, there's so many elements to it that have to resonate with one another. So I'm really grateful to have had those experiences because it's sort of put me in this position where I am not in a rush. I really see it as continuously in development. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. It's a great way to look at it. Before we go, I've asked every artist in the festival that I've had a chat with something to this effect. What do you need as an artist in order to bring your work to light?
What do I need as an artist to bring my work to light?
Yeah, like what do you have to have in place? It could be anything. It could be I need my instrument. I need a pen, a pencil, rent, Instacart, anything. Like what has to be there in order to allow you to bring your art to where it needs to be?
I think what it really is a continuous daily urging to tell the story. For me, it's about storytelling. You know, and if I sit on a project or an idea for a while and it starts to drift away and I become uninterested, then I don't continue with it. But if I wake up every day and every time I think about it, it gives me sort of like butterflies to think about telling this story, then I know it needs to be told. So I guess I really have to have that. And that goes for the process of writing too. I mean, sometimes you can get lost and kind of go off in a tangent, but I really try to monitor myself, and the next morning I'll read. And if I've started to lose that feeling, I'll scale back and it helps me stay true to it. But, you know, as an actor for many, many years, as a singer-actor, everything's about storytelling, and everything on the page that you do on the stage is about how you can effectively tell that story. And so I think that bears true in my writing too. I have to be really excited about it.
Urgency. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also to pray that no one else takes your idea in the meantime.
Well, you know, I used to feel that way too, but then I realized even if they did, they wouldn't lay it out the way that I do.
True.
So it would be different. And if I happen to see their work first, perhaps I have an opportunity to make adjustments, but it's not going to be plagiarized unless they took your script and presented it. I feel like whenever someone tells a story about Walt Whitman and this meeting with Oscar Wilde, that it's a very similar story, but I've heard many variations of it. I'm like, this feels like the same play.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same moment. Yeah. It's interesting.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Well, the play is called Dachau for Queers. It is a workshop production by Daniel Neer. It is on stage at Theater Exile, September 25th through the end of the festival. You can get your tickets at the Fringe box office, and we'll have the links in the show notes. Daniel, thank you for taking the time to unpack this with me. It was truly a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Darnelle. I really appreciate it.
The Broad Street Review podcast is an Emory production. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, visit us online at em3ry.com. To get involved with Broad Street Review, head on over to the website at www.broadstreetreview.com to find out how. Thank you for your part in keeping the conversation going.